Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Podcasting Mastered. I'm Chelsea, and I'm here with Wade as always. And we are back with another special episode this May, celebrating Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We've been doing this for the last couple years now, talking about a variety of media, from books to movies to video games, highlighting different Asian American works. And so we are back again on kind of a similar topic that we've talked about before. This episode is kind of a sequel-ish to an episode we did back in 2023 where we talked about Farewell to Manzanar and other stories of incarceration, and we are back with a graphic novel this time. This graphic novel is actually George Takei's, and it's called They Called Us Enemy, and so we're just kind of going to talk about that and go through his whole story and talk about who George Takei is. Maybe you've heard his name, maybe you haven't.
You've probably heard his voice at the very least. He's got a very distinctive voice.
Yes.
So it's hard to miss out on George, and that's a great thing.
Yes. I mean, he's so active, like, on social media and stuff now. I mean, many people probably know him from his work on Star Trek. That is one of his probably biggest roles. He's a big advocate, especially within the Japanese American community, but also in the LGBTQ plus community. And, you know, love to have someone like this who is not afraid to speak his mind and speak up on issues that need to be discussed.
He's certainly not afraid. And I remember growing up, like, once I got like into adulthood, I remember him posting on Facebook and everywhere else all about these different, all sorts of different causes. A lot of it is Japanese American and LGBT specific, but not all of it. He's always ready to champion a cause. You know, in the life that he's led, you know, he believes the American government is like the best because we are a participatory democracy. And so to him, it's like, if you're not participating in the democracy, you know, we have no right to complain about it. And he's very open-minded, and he speaks out all the time. And everything he does, like all of his projects, like his entertainment projects, they themselves also touch on all of these topics. Not like necessarily like in a forefront manner, but, you know, it's who he is, and who he is shines through in everything that he does. And he's such an inspiration, you know, not just as a gay man, but just as somebody who does not see themselves as the focus point of anything, but in a belief where, like, everybody is different, but also the same. Like, our differences make us the same kind of person, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And it just, anytime I hear about what he's doing, my heart just soars. And finally getting to read this graphic novel, just, like, good Lord. I don't have words right now for just how I'm happy that we got the chance to do this.
Yeah. I know, because this was, for both of our first times reading this is a graphic novel that we have heard of in the past, but it was good to just be able to sit down and finally read this. And this graphic novel is so interesting on so many ways. So this graphic novel is a memoir. It mainly does touch on his earlier life as Japanese American, being incarcerated during World War II and being sent away from their homes and moving around to these different so-called camps. But it's so interesting because this book also, he like reflects on it as he's recalling his life and adding extra information, just and reflecting on like his feelings, because people that experience this is a very complicated thing to experience, but also just being so much of an advocate today and just continuously fighting for the people and for essentially equality in all these ways and recognizing different groups of people that need to be heard. But you see where he came from, and it's just amazing. His story, it's very interesting, and this is honestly like legitimately like a good book for like kids to read, like history wise, like including in like schooling, because I think it does a really good job of covering the entirety of this particular section during World War II, but also just being, you know, it gives you that real personalized aspect because this is a real person's story telling this and helping.
Well, and he's so, he's just so respectful about it. And there's not a lot of negativity to be had. Like, to me, like, to talk about something so traumatic and awful that a government could do to a group of people, right? But to, like, not talk about it in a negative way is just wild. Like, the strength of will necessary for that is crazy. like in the book, he specifically talks about President Roosevelt, giving the order for all of these things to happen, but he also speaks of him continuously in such a respectful manner. And he highlights positive things that Roosevelt did. And, well, because of President Roosevelt, we have this and this and this. But, but he is a man. He's not infallible. He made mistakes. But there's a lot of respect in how George Takei approaches all of that. I mean, even talking about, like, the senators and stuff who really, like, pushed a lot of the more, like, radical, hateful, aggressive aspects of all of it. I mean, it was very just factual, and, he could have read them all for filth, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
which, I mean, there should be nothing against somebody who experienced this not to call these people terrible people for what, like, George Takei and his family had to go through. Like, stating that, like, I think it's okay to say that. But yes, I think that's what makes this graphic novel so interesting, is that he's able to, I guess it's almost a little bit more of a level-headed approach to allow people who aren't familiar with this, or people who are and just want to hear more of his story, a way in to being able to just digest this information that happened in our nation's history and to learn from it, with the goal of, yes, trying to not have this happen again to anybody.
Right. Well, because, like, I think we talked about this when we covered Farewell to Manzanar, but I never learned about any of this, like, within the context of, like, a social studies class. I didn't know about any of this until we read Farewell to Manzanar in, like, my freshman, sophomore English class, when, I didn't know that our country was responsible for rounding up a group of people simply because of their ancestry.
Yeah.
And there's just no justification. It was unconstitutional. There was just nothing but fear-mongering going on as that happened. And the amount of people that it affected, like, throughout the next 5 decades, is just remarkable.
Yeah. And what's different and kind of cool is with this graphic novel is that, like, George Takei's story is different than the story in Farewell to Manzanar. Like, similar things happening of relocating to families, but, like, he really does a lot of, it's just that courage to explain, like, what your family went to, what your family thought, and how this affected his life and his family's life for, like, generations to come, but also in the immediacy of that time.
Yeah, because, like, Farewell Manzanar was really, it was more like, this happened, and then this happened, and these are, like, the conditions we had to live in, and this is just how it was. But this graphic novel was really more about the feelings behind it, and the reflection on it as he got older, and because, like, timeline-wise, we jump around a lot. We go from, today's George sitting in front of a Comic-Con panel,
yes,
talking about this to, when this happened, I was, like, he would have been, like, 5. Something like that. Well, I would imagine I felt this way, and my parents felt this way, and I know my dad felt this way because we would talk about it, and a lot of things he didn't realize until he was older, and all sorts of things, but there's just so much reflection and introspection going on, which makes it much different than Farewell to Manzanar.
Well, and it's also, like, we just see, like, a different, like, family's dynamic as well, because we see throughout this graphic novel with George just always talking to his father, and George kind of challenging his father a lot throughout their lives together, like, even when they're older, trying to understand, like, well, why didn't you do this? At your age, I would have stood up and I would have worked harder for this, and, like,
how could you have not been more angry about all of these things that were happening? And George's dad is more or less just like, well, if that's how you feel about it, then that's how you feel about it. But,
yeah,
it's
like,
a very Japanese way of thinking about it. But
yeah, but also it's like things are more complicated than simply yes, just that whole black and white of yes or no type thing. But we see, like, because this does follow, like, his entire experience and just growing up, George talks about, like, his family immediately, like, having to, like, pack up quickly and being sent away to their first, like, pit stop on their journey. The first
stop on their journey. Yes. And the horse stable.
Yeah.
Holy cow. I turned that page and I was like, excuse me? And each family got a horse, like, paddock. Like, they got one stall to live in.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, and, like, with this whole thing too is that, like, this was at the Santa Anita Assembly Center, which today this is actually used as a racetrack today. like where these people were forced to live. That it was a racetrack then, and horse stables, and today it is like a very ritzy racetrack.
That's wild.
Yeah. And you're just like reflecting that, yeah, people were forced to be here with their families as a like temporary pit stop, but they were still there for like 6 months and living in these conditions. And it's just wrong. And I think with this graphic novel as well, too, is that because it's a graphic novel, we get that visual aspect with us where it's right there in front of us as we were reading about these things that happened to his family. We get to see the images that go along with it that just help to further just cement that this is real, this happened, this is what this was like. And it's just crazy because also what like really hits you next is like when the family is forced to get on the train because they're getting sent to a new location. They're getting sent to Arkansas, and you see the parts where like kids are just having fun because I mean, kids are told very simply, like, yes, we're going on a trip. Like, you know, you have to, these parents are dealing with trying to ease their children's worries while also dealing with their own. And we see, like, with George's family, just being like, you know, we're just going on a trip. We're going on a long vacation. But the kids are like, oh, let's play with the blinds because everybody in the train is told whenever they get to, like, a real station, nobody outside can see who they are, what they're doing. So they always have to
pull those blinds down because they don't want people seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you don't see it, then it's not real. Yeah. But it's interesting because, yeah, so George Takei's family gets sent from the Santa Anita Assembly Center, which was also like specifically because his family was in the LA area. And so that Santa Anita is like just right outside of LA. So it wasn't like that far with there. But now he's being put on a train to go all the way across the country to Arkansas. Now, I don't think many people think of when they think about what we talked about the Japanese Americans being interned across the US, that this is the easternmost place where people were sent in Arkansas. On the eastern side of Arkansas, there were actually 2 of these camps. It was Rower, where his family was at, and Jerome. They were only like 30 miles apart from each other, but it's in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas, hot, swampy, places where people shouldn't live.
Yes.
Well, the conditions wise, or a ton of people to be sent there.
Yeah.
And that was the goal. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, at this point, there was, like, barracks,
mm-hmm.
barbed wire fences, barracks, like, places for them to, like, kind of live that weren't horse stalls. But there was one room, walls were, like, paper thin. They got weather. I mean, it was hot, it was cold and snowing, you know, there was, like, full year-round weather.
Because when his parents opened up the door for the first time, the amount of heat that was in that building was unbearable for anybody.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, there's no air conditioning, circulation, or anything like that. It is just a hot room baking in the sun, which is awful.
And as far as like family goes, there was his mom and dad, and there was him. He's the oldest, like 4 or 5. He had a little brother, but he also had a baby sister.
Yes,
like actual baby sister.
Mm-hmm.
Who especially like living in like horse stalls for all that time. Like hygiene was absolutely something that was a problem. Like health issues, sickness spread like crazy. Like they got to shower like in the horse paddock, like open air in the middle of the stable. Like everybody got to watch everybody shower all the time. But that was it. That wasn't hygienic for people.
Yeah. And it was so like inhumane as well because like the bathrooms area, it was just like a row of toilets. Just like, you know, many people, I would say, are pretty modest and just having to be thrust in those situations of let's just be right in front of everybody doing our business. Like, it's just not good for anybody.
No.
No.
Not human.
I'm going to keep saying no. It's terrible.
No.
Yeah. Kind of a little bit of interesting tidbit that I found out was that, so today, we'd also talked about in Farewell to Manzanar, that after the war, after everybody was sent away from, after being sent to all these places across the US, all these camps, the government quickly tried to like dismantle them and tried to erase them from existence. So there is not a lot there today in any of these places. And specifically in Arkansas, I've been to Arkansas, Rower, where George Takei's family was at. There is like a cemetery that's still there, and there's a couple kiosks where it's been a while since I went, but they were pretty old kiosks, but they used to have like recordings in them, and he actually did some of the like narration talking about his family's experience there and kind of helping you like walk around the cemetery, kind of reflect and also hear.
That's cool.
Yeah, George Takei's story as well. And then the other one that was further south in that Jerome, there's just a memorial statue there, and the rest is just people's farmland. But in between them, interestingly enough, there is an old railroad station that's like a museum talking about this area. And because Amy and I went there, probably like 6+ years ago now, the lady who was running it, she was talking about how she had grown up in Arkansas. She was a much older lady, and she was talking about how she was just a kid during this time, but she lived in that area. She had no idea about this until many years later, that Japanese Americans were living in these barbed wire fenced areas right next to her home. She had no idea about it. And just shows like people live next to these areas, and some people didn't even know growing up that we did this to Americans and in our own backyard, literally.
Oh, right, because, it wasn't like the people doing it, it was just the government. And it's just, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Oh.
And it was really sweet just hearing this lady be like, I had no idea about this, but now I want everybody to know about this. And so, like, that's why she was working at this museum, just sharing her story and knowledge, but also to let people know, hey, this is a part of our history not many people may know about, and you should come here to learn about it. So I thought that was a pretty interesting experience, a real life experience to have come across.
Well, that's when it comes to all of these kinds of situations, it takes everybody to spread awareness and to heal. It's not just for the group that was offended the most. Mm-hmm. It's for everybody, because directly, indirectly, what have you, we all play a role in it every single day, at least in not spreading what doesn't need to be spread. And I think we all know that we are living in similar times today. Mm-hmm. With everything going on, lots of fear-mongering and the use of descriptive words that are not true, rounding people up, mass deportations, everything like that. What's the difference? Because with these Japanese Americans, these were first, second, third generation people. And the first generation people, like the ones who moved here from Japan, they were not allowed citizenship. They met all conditions, and the government said no. They were allowed to stay, they're allowed to work, they're allowed to live, it was fine. They just were not allowed citizenship. So when all of this came to pass, and like, you're not citizens, you're coming with us, you're not true Americans. And what's the difference? And their children and their grandchildren who were born in the country, they were not treated any differently. They were Americans. They didn't know another country, another culture, and most of them probably another language.
Yeah.
It's just wild that we see the repeating of so many things that did not happen that long ago due to fear-mongering and everything else.
Yeah, like that's what it is. Yeah, there's spreading this fear and these things. There was even, I read recently, there was a survey that was done recently about how people even view Asian Americans today. And it was insane, the numbers. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was such a high percentage of people who still find like Asian Americans like something to be feared today. Like, and that's just insane seeing, like, but like, yes, we do have this climate today as well, but just being like, still so much like othering, still so much like divisiveness of just
the other, the enemy.
Yes, yeah. But being like, this makes the ultimate question too, like, what makes you American? Why are we differentiating between different Americans out there? The people who say those kinds of things, they don't understand what it means to be American. We're all different, and we're all American. Yeah.
A religion, a race, an ancestry, all of us are different. That is the whole point of being American. None of us come from the same place. None of us come from a better place.
Yes. Very true.
There's none of that. And we all came together here for a specific purpose. And that's the end of the story. If you can't get along with your neighbor, you leave.
Yeah. So with George Takei's story, yeah, we see that again and again. We're like, yeah, this is crazy. This was the 1940s, which realistically, yes, that wasn't that long ago. But his experiences and talking about still dealing with all that racism, but then also the irony is that, like, he talks about in this graphic novel that, nobody wanted to live in these places. Nobody wanted to live into these incarceration camps. But at the same time, it was this weird situation where they were almost safer because they were away from all the hate, all the prejudice out there. They were being almost protected in a sense. And then like after all this hate had been spreading throughout World War II, and then people being sent there, but then afterwards being like, where do we go from here? We have to leave these places. And
the panic. I could not imagine.
Yes.
Because it was a situation where the war is over, the camp is closing. Like, we can't stay here. We have to go somewhere. But where do we go back to? Where is home now? They took ours away, And like, so George's family, they go back to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
They lived on the streets for a while, like literally in gutters, surrounded by alcoholics and all sorts of just terrible things, not suitable for children who were 5 to 9 years old.
Yeah.
Before they were able to rent a hotel room and they stayed there for,
it was a good while.
Before they were able to like, so the parents could work and build up some money and finally like get an apartment, something like that.
Yeah.
But like, that's crazy because they owned a house, they owned a house before they left. But when a man with a gun shows up on your doorstep and says you have 10 minutes to pack what you can and you're getting on a bus, after they left, those homes were basically gifted to the government. All of the personal belongings, the little part about like, well, if you had like a farm, you had to stay and work on the farm, like until like that bus came to pick you up. And if you stopped working at any point before that, you would be labeled a treasonist.
Yeah, that was
and carted off. That's just disgusting.
Yeah, and because this graphic novel also touches on it, which as well as Farewell to Manzanar does, about like, well, some people were trying to like, they can't take everything with them because you could only take what you could carry. So some people were selling stuff, but then people were taking advantage, being like, I don't deserve your dirty stuff. Let me like get it at the cheapest rate possible. And we saw actually both in Farewell to Manzanar and in the graphic novel, we show like some of the women just like breaking stuff in front of them because like, well, I'm not going to give you away my stuff, these like treasured heirlooms. I'm just rather than be destroyed.
It's just like a measurement of pride.
Terrible. Yeah.
Like, if I can't take it, I'm certainly not giving it to you. You who are forcing this terribleness upon us all.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It's just crazy. And kind of going back to actually one part of George's story is that, so in between Rower and the end of the war, this was one of the most like biggest contested things that happened during the incarceration situation, was that not only were all these Japanese Americans sent to all these, quote, camps in the middle of nowhere, all these harsh conditions, being forced from their homes, like, they were also being questioned constantly, their loyalty. And there came a time where the government was like, yeah, we kind of want to, ask again. So there became this big questionnaire that came out, and it became basically infamous because of two big questions on the questionnaire. And this caused a lot of big deal. Like, this was a really big deal because essentially the first question was asking, let me see if I get this right. Like,
I think
will
it was,
you serve in the army?
Will you serve in the army?
Yeah.
Which they were not allowed to do before the war. They were sent away. And now all of a sudden, of course, they need more people.
Yeah.
So they asked if they were willing to be in. And then the next question.
Well, and then everybody was asked this question about serving in the military. And some of these people are like a lot older and they're like, are you kidding me?
Of course
like,
not.
Why?
And like women, women could not. They just could not.
No.
They literally could not do it.
So it's just like, why are you asking this? And then the second one, which is the like longest question in the world, that is the most dramatically stated, which did cause a lot of confusion for people because it's basically like, do you forswear all allegiance like to any other
to the emperor and every,
Yeah. And it's just like became such a big question because it's like, well, it's offensive and it's also a catch-22 because it's like, if people answer this, then that means they did have loyalty to Japan. But a lot of these people are like, all we've ever known is America. Like, we've only ever known the United States, like growing up in like wherever, like California or whatnot. It's like, we have no allegiance to a foreign nation that we've never been to. And other people are just like, what does this even mean? And it's also kind of a confusingly worded question. So everybody had to fill out this questionnaire, and there became a thing because a lot of people were also angry, obviously. Like, you're already in the situation, you want me to serve, and you want me to, like, say I don't have any allegiance to Japan. So there became a group of people who answered no, especially no to both the questions, and they became, like, the no-nos. And there also became a specific group of men that became, like, the no-no boys. And all these people were considered, quote, kind of bad people because they're a threat to, yes, radicals, a threat to our nation. So many of these people were sent to a different incarceration camp. They were sent to Tule Lake. Tule Lake became one of the most infamous ones because it was also insanely even more guarded than all the ones we've talked about so far.
There was like three layers of barbed wire fence.
Yeah.
With like armed gunmen and towers and
tanks. Like, come
tanks.
on.
Yeah.
Which you also see that is really dangerous as children when George talks about his experiences with like some older kids and talking about like,
oh gosh, that scared me.
Yes.
Ooh.
It's very scary because like, and George also talks about how like a good majority of the people at Tule Lake were children. So like, but all these people are radicals as seen to our government. And so they're all sent to this basically high security prison. And you see George just like with these older kids trying to like, you know how kids are, being like, I bet you can't do this. Do you want to do this? And you're like, oh no. What is like, it's so dangerous because you don't know how like these soldiers are going to take these kids' antics and tricks, and you're just like, what is going to happen to these poor children, or even children, which I think we even saw in Farewell to Manzanar as well, where she talks about like getting close to the fence and stuff like that. And you see so many things because like kids are going to be kids are going to dare kids to do things and get into trouble, but in a super high stakes environment like this, it's just you're holding your breath hoping not for disaster.
I know. I was holding my breath while I was reading it. I was like, oh no, what?
Yeah. I was like, oh no, him with his little brother. I'm like, no.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh, what is he going to have to tell his parents after this? Like, but like, luckily that didn't go, too poorly, but we just see, because also, specifically where George talks about being at Tule Lake, that because all these so-called radicals were here, we also see there's a lot of mistrust. People start turning on each other because there's so much stakes with like the military shipping people off, like labeling people. Because, okay, when you put a bunch of people together and people are angry, there's going to be some protest. So we have people who are protesting this because obviously it is wrong. But then we have all these soldiers just getting confused with everybody and just taking people in the middle of the night from their families and then being labeled as radical. And we see a point where George talks about where he's with his dad at something that he doesn't realize till later is a protest, and he asks his dad about it. His dad's like, yeah, I was going to protest this because like in the middle of the night, some guy who was not one of these radicals was taken away from his family. And he's like, I don't agree with that. Like, we have to show, that it's wrong. Yeah, solidarity. And we see that a lot. Like, George talks a lot about his dad, like, trying to become, like, an active member of the community, like, becoming, like, the manager of his blocks at both Rower and Tule Lake, and just, he gets busy with his work of helping others. And we also see some of the stuff the mom does as well, which I thought that one scene back when they first unpack their stuff.
That precious lady.
Yes. But she brings her sewing machine, which... carrying a sewing machine, an old sewing machine, like, my goodness.
If you've never picked up a sewing machine, holy cow, you have no idea.
Yeah. But, like, that was also her defiance because it was something that was not allowed. It was one of the items not allowed, just like, photography was not allowed. Now, the government did send people in to take pictures, but people alone within these places were not allowed to have their own cameras. But it is fun to see pictures actually today that people have smuggled cameras from the different camps, and so you get to see more of how it was there and stuff that people did during the day to kind of get a better idea of how people dealt with the day-to-day. But yeah, it was just that sewing machine, and she's like, no, I'm gonna sew things, I'm gonna make the most of these situations we're being put into. And yeah, she whips up curtains, decorates the place a little bit, yeah,
clothes, all sorts of things,
which was practical, especially for a clothing aspect.
Of course.
My goodness, yeah. But yeah, it's just, yeah, George reflecting on his time at Tule Lake, it seemed like a really intense environment, and just, it was also one of the largest incarceration camps as well that housed the most people. I can't remember how many thousand he said it was at the height, but
12,000 or something like that. It was huge.
It was, yeah. Which I don't think we said specifically where Tule Lake is. So that is like way northern California, like middle of nowhere, Northern California, almost at the border with Oregon. So, and also, like I said, all these places were middle of the nowhere places, very harsh living conditions, hard to survive. So, yeah.
I think if you haven't read this, it's not terribly big. It wouldn't take you long to get through it. And frankly, like the target audience for this, folks, is like older elementary school. It's written for anybody to understand easily, like what he's talking about. It is worth going to your local library, your school library, hopping onto like Hoopla. It's all for free. I mean, it's definitely worth a read to better understand just what's going on today, what's happened before. Or if you just like George Takei, I mean, go right ahead. You know? Even it's crazy, even in a book like this, we get one of his classic oh my.
Yes.
Like I was like,
more than
I saw that, I read it, and I was like, aha, yeah, there it is.
Yes.
But it's definitely worth a read, and it's a graphic novel, you know. It's like this drawn by a manga artist. So like definitely worth your time. Especially if you like history, if you like things like that, you would absolutely love it. Like I said, it's not too negative. It's not too heavy, and there's tons of references and stuff that, and just little bits of information. Like for instance, when he got his job with Star Trek, like the studio that he worked for was owned by Lucille Ball. Like,
I did not
I Love
that.
Lucy. I didn't know that. Like, her and I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy who played the husband on the show. When I Love Lucy finally ended, the two of them got together and bought the studio and continued to run it themselves. And like, he was an immigrant himself from Cuba. And it's crazy that like they're essentially the ones that hired him. Which was, good lord, in like 1965?
Yeah,
something like that. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, but it's also just amazing because, like, George also talks about in the graphic novel being like, I must have this role with Star Trek. Like, this is a dream role. But also just being like, how groundbreaking, clearly, that show was as a time, just even as a show alone. But
in
also just
1965. Holy cow.
Yes.
Because he talks about, like, you know, he started in musical theater and going to college and doing a show. And then as he got on TV, it was just kind of like, well, I played this role for an episode and this role. But he wasn't playing a character. He was playing, like, his race. Like, stereotypical Japanese person. That's what you're playing because we're doing a plot right now relevant to a Japanese American person, you know? But when he was offered the role as Sulu, in Star Trek, they were, like, all about being respectful. Like, this is not just a Japanese role. This is, like, the way that we want the world to see all people. Because in the future, all people will be the same. And we want you to represent, you know, all Asian Americans, basically.
Yeah. But, like, you
all
get a real story. Yeah.
Yes.
Like, you get to be
you
real
are a
person.
full, true character with your own full, true stories, interacting with other people who are also playing their truest selves, you know? Which I've never seen Star Trek, never seen the original. I haven't seen The Next Generation with Patrick Stewart. But it honestly makes me want to go watch just for that alone. I mean, I have to watch William Shatner, I guess, but... but hey.
But yeah, it's really cool to see that he was given such a great opportunity like that, and to see people who were just like, you know, people like to time just to see race and see stereotypes, but like, we want to give you an opportunity to be more, and we want to do this for everybody on this show, and that's really cool to see. Yeah, like we said, yes, go read this graphic novel if you haven't. Also, George Takei does actually have another book as well. He wrote actually a book that was made specifically for children. It's more of a children's picture book that's called My Lost Freedom. I haven't read that yet, but I'm planning to read that in the coming weeks. And so that's also another book if you have children to check out as well, because it's a big picture book. And yeah, that book just came out last year. So it's really cool that he's been working on these books, trying to tell this real part of our history to the younger generation who may not know.
You know, and he's 88. Did you know that?
Yeah.
I was thinking he was 80.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just like basic math in my head. I was like, oh, he's about 80 by now. No, 88. He's almost 90.
Yeah, it's crazy. But he's still going strong, still speaking out for everybody and creating awesome works for people to read.
Absolutely. I mean, if you don't know much about George Takei, go visit his Wikipedia. Learn a little bit about him. Go watch Star Trek.
Yes.
Or anything he's in. He's in lots of stuff. He does lots of voice acting. You've probably heard his voice before. It is just, it's so unique. It's all George.
Yes. So listeners, with that, like we said, give this graphic novel a go and let us know if you've actually already read this and what are your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. You can let us know if you follow us on social media at Pod Demastered. Also make sure that you follow or subscribe to this podcast so that you won't miss out on future episodes. We will continue our special May episodes for every single May, but we will actually be heading into Pride Month with June. So we will have a couple special episodes for you guys with that month as well. But yeah, thanks so much for listening to this week's episode, and we hope you tune in to our next one.
See ya.